Okay, so hello and welcome everyone to the Green Party Trade Union Group's hustings for the position of Deputy Leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. It's great to have you all here. Before we get on to the substance of the meeting, I just want to give you some brief introduction to the format. So the way this is going to work is I'm chairing the hustings. I'm going to be posing questions, a single question each time, to the whole panel, and then I'll go to each of the panel members in turn so that they can answer your question, answer the questions. The questions are a mixture of questions submitted by all of you in advance, so thanks very much for contributing in that way, and a number of questions that have also been submitted by members of the Trade Union Group Committee. For each of the questions, after the candidates have come back and made their contributions, they will have the opportunity to make an additional contribution if they would like to do that. I think that's pretty much everything that I have to get through. I can see that the transcript has been enabled. I hope that is useful for those who need it. Okay, I think that's all of that, and we're going to get going. So the first question: prices are rising in the shops and in our bills, and wages have stagnated for decades. In response, we're seeing a resurgence in industrial action led by trade unions such as the RMT and the CWU, among others. How, in your view, should the Green Party position itself around strike action like this? And what would you do in response to it if you're elected as deputy leader? For our first answer, I'm going to go to Shara Ali. Shara, can you go in, please?
Thanks very much, Matthew, and a great opening question. The Green Party has so much to say to workers and those who are fighting for their rights. And what is it that all of us want in a decent work environment? Well, we want a work-life balance, don't we? We want to know that when the paycheck comes in, we can afford a roof over our heads and the energy that is required to have basic needs met. And that's where this government is failing miserably. In terms of the policies that the party has been promoting and advocating for, and so have I been throughout my 20 years in the Green Party, whether it's on picket lines or as deputy leader in the past, alongside campaigns in the Green Party. Some of those key policies are to do with a living wage, a basic income, but especially decent terms and conditions. So I've had quite an extensive professional life in a career in education, for example, and I have seen how people are exploited. And I've stood up for them, not just in my voice, but also when I've been in a position to do more. That is to say that I've used the instruments of legal power to make sure that gender pay gaps in my own environment are overcome. So the Greens, finally, they have much to say on this, whether it's universal basic income, whether it's decent terms and conditions, whether it's a better work-life balance. But ultimately, and I hope to develop this in the hour to come, we need to be focusing on social and economically useful labour. And the kind of economics that we have at the moment isn't an economics that will allow us to live much longer on this planet.
Thank you very much, Shara, for that. For the next answer to this question, I'm going to go to Zach Polanski. But before I do that, just a quick request we've had. If you're not one of the candidates or you're not me, please do consider turning off your video. It reduces the bandwidth requirements and makes it much easier for some people to watch the hustings. So yeah, over to Zach. How should the Green Party position itself around strike action?
Thank you, Matthew. And just to repeat as well, thank you for putting this hustings on, and thanks for everyone for being here. I think the first word, and it's an important word, is solidarity. And it's simple as that. I think we need to make sure that we're standing up for people who are vulnerable, people who are not in work, and also for groups, for instance, people with disabilities. There are often a higher disproportionate amount of people with disabilities who are unemployed. who feel like they might not have representation. So I think there's a really, really important point there about making sure we're showing solidarity with everyone in these situations. And then I think another point is Mick Lynch. I think he's demonstrated exactly how you do it. You have very common sense, coherent arguments to make. You don't get distracted when you're on the media by all sorts of nonsensical ideas, and you put it forward. But you don't just go on the media. You also need to make sure that you're out there doing grassroots activism. And on the London Assembly, I've been doing that. I've been out on picket lines several times with various strike workers, and including your good work, Matthew, and often linking me with some of those marginalized groups. And I think the third part of it, as well as solidarity and getting our hands dirty and being there on the picket line, I think it's about having policies that are a future vision. I think sometimes we can get caught up in the anger, and it's understandable. There is anger and frustration, and so there should be. But there also needs to be a hopeful vision there. And I think that hopeful vision does include a universal basic income. On the London Assembly, I hope we'll be able to talk about this evening, but I've put forward to the mayor a pilot for universal basic income. He's finally, after a lot of badgering, agreed that I might be able to go ahead with it. I'm just creating a research paper at the moment about what that might look like. And actually, I do agree with the Green Party Trade Unions group call for a minimum wage of at least £15 an hour, and I'll be backing that. So I think it's important that, as well as showing solidarity, being out there with the workers, we also have future policies, and we have good costed policies, and we have people like Catherine Rowett, our spokesperson on work and welfare, out there being able to express those things along with the leadership.
Thanks very much for that, Zach. Next, we're going to go to Nick Humberstone. Nick, how would you answer this question?
So unions are great. I'm part of one myself, and seeing people come together to demand better and to take action to effectively demand the world that they want to be instead, in this context, it's within their workplace, is really important and really powerful. And the thing I care most about is things being democratic, even to the point where if we find workplaces that are campaigning for things that don't quite align in the way that we think changes should be made, or the way that practices in their workplace could be made better, if they want to do them slightly differently, I will still fully support them, because it's the people at the bottom deciding amongst themselves in that decentralized process the outcome of what they want to see for their organization. The strikes are something that we should be loud and clear about our support for them. I know we'll get people that come back and say, oh, wow, you can't, how can these people get to work now? Oh, the trains are not working. But we're always ahead of the curve in recognizing the bigger picture, which is that things cannot go on the way they are going on. People cannot continue to work harder and harder under the demands for more and more productivity while still getting the same wage, so therefore getting poorer and poorer. That can't keep going on. So it's also a really great opportunity for us to emphasize, by showing our solidarity, by being there on the picket lines with them and standing side by side with them and supporting them. It's a good opportunity for us to make it clear that we aren't just an environmental justice movement, and that, you know, we're not here just to say, oh, cool, we're going to plant some more trees, we're going to solve the environment thing. Great, that's sorted now. It's an example of how we can show people that we really do have a solution for all the problems, and that we also have the solutions for the problems that are right on your doorstep, that are affecting you day to day now, not for the climate, which for a lot of people, obviously right now, that climate thing is coming a lot more to the forefront for people. But it takes a certain level of privilege to be able to step back and go, well, what's going on in the bigger picture here? That's a problem we should deal with. That's going to be a problem later. But supporting people to demand better from their workplaces, whether that's pay or whether that's other conditions, is important, because it's the stuff that's right on their doorstep.
Thanks very much for that, Nick. And finally, on to Ty Scott. How would you address this?
Thanks, Matthew. It's a really, really good question. And, you know, I've said repeatedly throughout, I'll turn my phone off. I've said repeatedly throughout this campaign that, you know, as a deputy leader of the Green Party, I want to represent the Green Party that fights for all forms of social justice. And that isn't just climate justice, that is economic justice, racial justice, justice against widening inequality and the perpetuating growth of the ruling capitalist class. You know, we really need to call out the widening inequality gap, which is completely getting worse, because nobody right now is challenging it. We do not have a worthy opposition who are doing their job. The Labour Party have not done their job as an opposition. They are failing to stand up for workers. And if the Labour Party are failing to stand up for workers when it is literally in their name, who will do it for them? We need to be loud and proud of what we stand for. I believe that's left-wing eco-socialist values. I believe that's bringing power back to the people, bringing power back to communities, bringing public services, or bringing services back into public ownership. These are the things, the principles we have to live by. Because right now, the Tory party are getting away with all their anti-union laws because the opposition are not challenging them. And right now, it's not even just anti-union laws. There's all sorts of anti-civil disobedience laws. We're seeing with the crime and policing bill and particular sections of that was essentially criminalised coming from certain backgrounds, marginalised communities like the Gypsy Roma community, who have essentially been criminalised by the policing crime and policing bill. So hot. So right now, it's not just anti-union law. There's all laws about anti-civil disobedience, and the reason they get away with them is because there's not a worthy opposition shouting out against them, and we have to use our platform to be that voice. Because right now, the Labour Party seem to be stuck on repeating the Tory party's route to success a couple of years ago and focusing on exactly the same targets the Tories did, and just ignoring their base, the reason and the life and blood of why they exist. Now, I believe we are strong in our ideals and our values, and I believe if we talk loudly about them, people understand that too. Because we need to be clear that we want to take action with workers demanding a better standard of living, take action with migrants and refugees against deportations and the hostile environment, and take action against the greed of corporations and their influence over policy and politics. This is something I would do loudly and proudly as Deputy Leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. And I'm very clear that the Green Party is to position itself strongly in favour of unions, in favour of civil disobedience when necessary, and in favour of those things, basically.
Thanks very much, Ty. That was great. And thank you so much, all of the candidates, for answering that first question. So I'm going to move on to the next question now, which is this. Now, most people at this hustings and all of the candidates, I'm sure, will agree that a strong relationship with the trade union movement is an important thing for the Green Party, and many of you have covered that in your first answer. But the question is, what, in your view, should that strong relationship look like? What shape do you think it should take? And what do you think that the Green Party and trade unions should be seeking to achieve together? So for that sort of long question, I'm going to go first to Nick Humberstone. Nick, if you could come in on that.
So in terms of our work with unions, we do need to do more to work within those unions. We have members that are part of different unions, and we can certainly do more to organise so that we can make a difference and state our case for the direction that that union as a whole should be leaning towards. I do think one of the things we have to consider is how much time we want to spend focusing on working on building up support with unions against our priority towards winning elections, which is a difficult one because in terms of unions, part of the long game, the bigger picture, is that they're going to be a core essential part of that. And along the way, there'll also be an opportunity for us to state our values on a larger platform, potentially an opportunity to find people that want to get involved with our organisation and support our aims alongside the aims of the union they're part of. But it is a difficult one because I do think that we do need to be prioritising elections at most opportunities. So it's a bit of both. Like most things, we should do a bit of everything, and we should be working within those unions to build power and find ways that we can organise. Maybe we need to look at having within the groups we have a way that people can make it clear to others and find other people that are part of the same unions as them, because getting those connections and relationships between people within the party is the first step for how we start turning things around.
Thanks very much for that, Nick. So next, I'm going to go to Zach Polanski. Zach, what do you think that relationship should look like? What shape would you want that to take?
Brilliant. So jumping off Nick's answer a little bit, we have to get Greens elected. It's as simple as that. I was watching BBC Parliament today, just briefly in my lunch break, and Caroline Lucas stood up and asked a question about the extreme heat and the link to the climate chaos. And Kit Malthouse, who was the minister who was giving the answers, gave woefully inadequate answers. And then other people from other parties got up, and there were some pretty terrible answers. Notably, Jeremy Corbyn was actually pretty good on it and stood in solidarity with Caroline, as you'd expect, really. The point being here, though, is that getting Greens elected and supporting trade unions are not two different tasks, and I don't think they're competing priorities. I think we are not a credible movement, even within Target to Win, if we're knocking on people's doors, but we're not listening to what people are saying to us, and that's a crucial part of Target to Win. And when we're talking about trade unions, what we're really talking about is listening to people, listening to workers, listening to them about their hopes, about their fears, about what they're worried about in terms of pay, how they'd want better working conditions during COVID, but even outside of COVID, basic things like sick pay and making sure, you know, that they can go to work. That's a whole nother conversation too. And I think the crucial thing here is to build these relationships and build these relationships over a long period of time. And I think that's something unique we have as a party. In fact, in my first ever Mayor's Question Time, I could ask Sadiq Khan about anything. And one of the first things I asked him about was bringing people's voices into City Hall. So actually hearing from people rather than politicians about what they wanted London to be run like. And this could be done in any city or in any county. And the mayor's response to me, and this is a mayor who's not awful and he's good on some things, but there's some big gaps, is that I was in danger of making myself redundant as a politician. And I think that's really revealing about the attitude that certainly comes from the Conservative Party, but also the Labour Party too often, which is this top-down kind of politics that we just need to control things. And if we allow people to organise, then that's a real problem to power and the establishment. And I think as a party, we're brave. We know that our members vote on our policies. We know that we want people power. And I think that has to extend to how we work with trade unions too. We have to listen to them. We have to be willing to be wrong sometimes. We have to be willing to be brave and show courage. We also have to lead, so we can't just listen, we have to take action too. But also when we're leading, we're making sure we're doing it with people, not for people. And whether that's people with disabilities, whether that's with Black and brown people or Indigenous people, or whether it's with people from the trade union movement, we're always demonstrating that willingness to collaborate from the bottom up and not impose our will on other people.
Thanks very much for that, Zach. So we've heard a lot about building that relationship with unions and how that relates to our electoral work. I'm going to go next to Ty Scott. And Ty, what's your angle on this?
Thanks. And I guess in an aim to try and not repeat too much of what Nick and Zach have said, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but I definitely do think we need to look to have strong relationships with the trade union movement. I think that is very, very important for the Green Party. I think if the Greens are to be generally taken seriously, I think it's important that we are seen as the forefront of protecting workers' rights. And in the current landscape of the way things work, unions are representative of protect the protection of workers' rights. So I think it's important to try, if possible, in our way to try and align with those movements. But I think sometimes we can maybe get caught up in thinking that unions are an exclusively Labour thing in a sense. Labour have the affiliations with unions, and they're sort of is their bread and butter, but there are so many unions that aren't Labour affiliated, for starters, and so many unions we could be looking to speak with and look to support. Great independent unions like the IWGB that we've worked with in Hackney or UVW, that do really great jobs to protect probably some of those most marginalised communities and some of those risky gig economy jobs, where those protections are so important. So I think it's really important that we do maintain a close relationship with places like that, because not only does it show that we are there in support of the workers' rights, but it also keeps us abreast of what's happening with people who are living in those scenarios. My work and our work in the Hackney Greens with the IWGB is not only hopefully help to get more people to be able to join their union and protect their rights, but also it's given us a massive insight into what the issues are of those working in the gig economy in the local area in which I live, what their problems are, what the issues are, what barriers they may face. So having that close relationship is mutually beneficial. It can hopefully help us to support workers and use our platform to really show we want to protect workers' rights, but also it can enable us to learn from those who are there on the ground. So I think it's really important that we do look to work with unions, and also unions very much do align with a lot of our thinking. Unions are, even the major ones, are pushing much more left-wing policies, are pushing for things like a Green New Deal. And what we need to do is try and work with them and show that any transition into the sustainable future will be a just transition. Show that this move is a sustainable future, which also means sustainable jobs, sustainable careers, and sustainable living. And try and make sure that by having a close relationship with unions, we can combat any rhetoric that sometimes those on the other side will try and give about a move to sustainable energy sources and everything will mean loss of jobs, loss of work, loss of stability and income. We can combat that by explaining and working with unions and workers to create a real transition to a proper green, sustainable future. So I think it's vital that we have that close relationship, and I'd like to maintain and grow that and work with the group here to do so.
Thanks very much, Ty. Loads to chew on there. Shara, last of all, what's your take on this?
Well, firstly, just to support what my fellow candidates have been saying, in particular, Zach was talking about the inextricability, if you like, between our electoral ambitions and grassroots campaigning. And it has to be that way, doesn't it? Because the Greens aren't seeking government for its own sake. They're seeking government to effect social and political and environmental transformation. We won't be able to do that to the scale that's required without bringing everybody on board and having the ear of us all. But I think one dimension which hasn't really been remarked on so far is how we as a party, I get this idea that we act on their behalf and with them, but there's not enough unionists in our party. We're often described, I think, as a bit out of touch. I do think we're out of touch, actually. I don't feel as though we have the ear of the working class. Some in the party have felt left out of decision-making and not being able to relate to others in the party. We do have a very high level of academic achievement in our party, but academic achievement isn't the only form of education. So I'm very proud, for example, that I went to a comprehensive school, for example, and I think this helps me to get out and about more and to relate. And that's incredibly important, not just for its own sake to be able to listen to others whose voice we need to amplify, but so that those unionists themselves can feel that our party is a home to them. And one of my key campaign themes, really, is that we need to reach beyond our comfort zone. We're not doing that. We should be a broad church politically across the political spectrum. And one of the things that unites us with unionists is the idea of collective action for the greater good, to overcome injustice wherever it occurs. That's what we should be doing more about. And just to mention briefly, because you may wish to move on in a minute, if you think about the Lucas plan, we've had the 40-year, not Caroline Lucas, of course, those we know, 40 years ago, we had the workers in Lucas Aerospace who could see that what automation was doing for the security of their job, but they were also concerned about the impending ecological and climate catastrophe. And what Greens need to do, and we've got an absolutely fantastic policy here, which we need to really broadcast, the idea that we should be converting overnight, if you like, nuclear weapon plants to renewable energy infrastructure manufacture. I mean, we have great skills in this country. I don't want them to be put towards killing people in faraway lands. We should be using that ingenuity, reskilling by all means, engineering those nuclear weapons manufacture plants towards a real industrial revolution in renewable energy. So those unionists, those workers on the ground, they understood that 40 years ago. And so we have the ideas, we have the policies, and guess what? It's coming from the grassroots, it's not coming from academics. So let's just build those bridges, but also make our party a little bit more welcoming and a little bit more inclusive for people across the political spectrum and of all classes.
Thank you very much, Shara. We've had our first mention of the Lucas plan. I almost feel like I should have a sort of buzzer that I can sort of press when that happens, but great to hear. And that contribution leads quite nicely onto the next question, which is this. Workers at British Airways are currently planning strike action for increased pay after years of pay cuts and also for guarantees of job security. The Green Party proposes to shrink the aviation industry really rapidly over the next several years, which would result in many job roles that currently exist ceasing to exist, going away. So the question is there a contradiction here? And is that a problem? And how should the Green Party approach disputes and strikes in carbon-intensive industries like aviation? So that's quite a long question, but an interesting one, I hope. And I'm going to go first to answer that to Zach Polansky. Zach, if you could give that a go, please.
Thank you. It is a really good question, and it's not just for the aviation industry. I think there's lots of industries where this issue comes to. I think I'll hit your buzzer as well and talk about the new Lucas plan, which I don't know if it's the same as talking about the Lucas plan, but so I've been having several meetings recently with Michael Rainsborough and various other people from the new Lucas plan, and I know Pete Murray, who's in the Green Party trade union group, is also heavily involved with them, and I've been talking to them through an umbrella organisation called Just Space. And Just Space, without taking too much time, is a group of community organisations that all come together to look at how could city life be different, both in terms of what they call a caring city. So they say if work doesn't have social value, and if it's not care work, then is it really work? What value is it really to it? And also looking particularly around biodiversity, the ecological emergency and the climate emergency. But if I go back to the Lucas plan, I think there's something really key here, which is this was a group of workers who essentially went to their boss at the time, or their bosses, who were totally uninterested in this idea that they should have social purpose, and they went away and did it themselves. Now, I think the Green Party has an opportunity here to show that we can pave the path and make things different. Now, I can see a huge problem here, and I'm going to go slightly on tangent, but I hope everyone will follow and realize it's not a tangent to avoid the question, it's just a missing jigsaw piece. When war breaks out somewhere like Ukraine, or not war, sorry, an invasion, people often turn straight away to us and demand that we're pacifists. And if there's any kind of idea that we give any arms or any defense at all to Ukraine, they say, I thought you didn't want war, and we absolutely don't want war. And the problem is that people don't come to us often in peacetime to talk about building peace or making peace. They come to us when there's a huge problem, when everything's gone to a word I'm not going to say, even though we're not on TV. And essentially, they look to us to sort out a mess that other parties have created because they didn't listen to us in the first place. Now, it's not good enough for us to throw our hands up in the air and say, we don't have a policy other than we told you so. You should have just had peace. We've got to have policies for when that happens too. And to link it exactly to the question now, I think the same is in aviation. Now, I don't think it's any secret that we don't want more aviation. In fact, I've campaigned heavily with Sean Berry to close City Airport. I've secured a U-turn from the mayor to U-turn on Gatwick expansion, and I'm currently opposing Heathrow expansion too. So, and I know lots of work is happening in Bristol Airport as well to look at stopping that there. And Manchester Airport is a whole new complication in itself as well that badly needs to be looked into. That is very different to not standing up for workers, and we absolutely need to stand up for workers. They are doing their best to pay the rent, to look after their kids. Doesn't mean they don't care about the environment. I think you could get an eco-activist who cares deeply about the environment, who happens to work at an airport because it's the closest or only place they could get work. And I think it's not good enough or not credible enough to throw our hands up in the air and not have solutions for these people. Now, the good news at the end of this answer is we do absolutely have solutions, and we've had solutions for a long time. In fact, in 2007, Caroline Lucas was putting together a Green New Deal. We know that other parties jumped on that and they kind of moved it around a bit, and they never really quite got the core of it, and they changed it and morphed it. But ultimately, at its core, it's saying there's no environmental justice without social, racial, and economic justice too. That can't be a slogan. Although it is a slogan, it can't just be a slogan. It also has to be about making sure that people are at the core of this environmental transition. And also, I just want to note in there too, it's not something we've talked about a lot in these hustings, but animals as well. Slightly separate issue, but we've got to look after all living things. So back to people though, we need to make sure that we're absolutely defending the most vulnerable people, and that includes defending and sticking up for those people who need jobs. And to be honest with people, that those jobs can't be in carbon intensive industries, not just because of those people, but those people's families and everyone who exists on this planet. So we need to make that just transition. And we're the only party who have the answers to the climate crisis, which also happen to be the answers to the cost of living crisis. And I think the more that we can demonstrate those things, and that these things are intertwined, the more that people will hear that green agenda, hear our green policies, and want to elect more Greens.
Thank you very much for that, Zach. And to any other candidates who might be asking themselves, if you do feel the urge to curse, please do. The watershed is 7 p.m. in the Green Party Trade Union Group. So go ahead. And this is not a family show. Next, I'm going to go to Ty Scott. We've heard from Zach about like how he thinks we should address this problem. is there a problem there, do you think? And sort of what do you think the Green Party should be doing?
Thanks, Matt. And sometimes difficult, it's usually you don't want to go first. Sometimes you can have a chance to listen to a few answers, but I did want to go first there because, I don't just want to repeat one of my fellow candidates' answers, but, I don't disagree with anything that was just said, especially one of the points there around supporting strikers, maybe in industries that we don't feel align with, the future we want to build, because end of the day, our dependency on an inequitable economic and social system means that some of us cannot be fortunate enough to work somewhere that fulfills all our moral virtues, for multiple different reasons. So yeah, we support fair pay, better conditions, better treatment for workers, I think, and I think that really has to continue to hold true. But in regards to the other side of that coin is just transition, which I know the terminology we've just heard now again, but the concept of just transition requires that workers who are displaced from hopefully soon to be obsolete fossil fuel based industries are supported into equivalent well-paid and skilled jobs in green sectors of the economy. So this is what we need to really not only advocate for, but try and help and work to enact policies behind, because we need to ensure that we create secure employment for those currently left behind by the highly unequal fossil fuel economy. So what we really have to show is that this move into a green economy is in no way a step backwards. It's a step forwards into a future of greater equality, improved quality of life, and stronger communities with more power and hopefully more democratic say in the world in which they live. There are so many different areas in which there can be new jobs in a green economy. We have home installation and retrofit. We have commercial buildings with the same, with the zero carbon transport and all the infrastructure that comes with that, the decarbonisation of current carbon intensive industries. We have so many and so many more different things in which we will need industry, we will need workers, skilled workers and hopefully highly paid workers to fulfill those roles to move us into a just transition. So I don't think anything that we promote when we're looking to call for the sustainable future we so desperately need is in any way hypocritical to our stance on workers' rights and fair pay and fair treatment. I think they go hand in hand as long as it's done in that right holistic manner. Because one thing I'm proud about with our policies is that they are looked at holistically, but we know that things have to come hand in hand. And these are two things that have to work together. And in that way, we ensure we're protecting our planet and protecting our future there, but also protecting workers' rights, which is also our rights as well. So yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Ty. Next, I'm going to go to Shara Ali. Shara, and just to sort of, I'm going to go for your answer to this, but just to sort of push the envelope slightly, what do we do when we say to workers, this is our plan, and they say, yes, but you still want to get rid of the job I have now? How do we address this, at least apparent issue?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And Matthew, you're actually encouraging us to interact with each other a bit, in a polite form. So let me begin my answer by saying Zach has mentioned some of the great work that he's doing, frankly, on the London Assembly already. And I do think, some of you may not have decided who you're going to vote for. I think one useful criterion might be who of the candidates might have time left over from the other things that they're doing to actually fulfill the role with the diligence and the single-mindedness that's required. So I won't be double hatting or triple hatting with other roles in the Green Party. I'll be across the country and on the airwaves, as I was in 2014 to 2016, as I hope a very effective deputy leader when we got our record 1.1 million votes. Some of the things that we do need to communicate better, and this is what's behind the question, is how can we avoid looking like we're pulling the rug from under those people who are going to be bearing the brunt of the first waves of climate change adaptation and mitigation. And let's be quite clear. I mean, I was one of the founding signatories of Extinction Rebellion in 2018, although things have changed a bit in terms of the dynamic of an organization. Maybe we'll come to that in a minute. It's really important that we tell the truth, which was one of the aims of Extinction Rebellion. But what we must avoid, if you think about the United Kingdom as a microcosm of the international arena, I mean, we've got international leaders strutting their stuff at the ill-fated COP26 and other arenas, and there's an expectation almost that the developing world, if you want to call them that, need to play their part maximally to the extent that we are. So we can have our cake and eat it. We've enjoyed a certain amount of technological process and all mod cons in the house, and I was going to use the word crapula. Okay, so I think that's within the boundaries of the words that we can use. But the amount of stuff that we're consuming and is ending up in landfill, and we're exporting to faraway lands and pretending that we're salving our own carbon consumption and production by not auditing it properly. But what's happening is a kind of a global neo-colonialism internationally, where we're expecting people who haven't yet enjoyed those goods to stop doing so in order to pull their weight equally. That's happening nationally as well, where we're expecting people who are key workers, often people on low wages, such as those in environment, in airport porterage, we're expecting them to take the brunt of their jobs having to end sooner, faster. And we can't afford to do that. We need to bring everybody on board equally. One of the main ways in which we can achieve this is through social and collective action. What we have to emphasize is that there have to be in place different jobs, reskilling, repurposing, but at the same time as being abundantly clear that we cannot simply rely upon carbon offsetting, for example. We cannot simply rely upon technology change to use less fossil fuels for aeroplanes. This is just a pipe dream. We are running up against a climate catastrophe if we needed more reminder. And the way that the news is framing even the current heat wave is as if, let's get over this and back to business as usual. We cannot afford to get back to business as usual. What we should be arguing for, whilst we're having this calamity of a crisis within our people not being able to rely upon going abroad using their flights, what we need to be reminding people of is that in the same way that in COVID, we had a net reduction in flights and a massive reduction also in carbon pollution effects, we need to be looking on the bright side, if you like. We need to be looking at the overall carbon emission, and we need to be using that as an additional lever to try and get us all living sustainably on this beautiful planet of ours, which is just going to pot at the moment. So, you know, by all means, we have to provide effective solutions to enable us to argue convincingly that people have to move away from these carbon intensive lifestyles, and they have to move away from these carbon intensive industries.
Thank you for that, Shara. And last but by no means least, I'm going to go to Nick Humberstone. Nick, what's your angle on this? Yeah, how would you answer this question?
Yeah, I just want to comment on what Shara said. I quite appreciated him widening the scope and looking at how it's not just industries in the UK, but also how we look at other countries around the world. We have to remember that we have had a huge, I guess, is it privilege that we have decided in a lot of Europe and in the UK to exploit the earth in order to advance to what we believe to be a better situation. One way of dealing with the fairness of that is to let other countries exploit the earth as well. That's not the solution we want. So there definitely is a duty on us to make sure that we are not just saying, oh, you know, we should do this here, but we should be actively supporting, particularly internationally, to make that transition for other countries to move on in terms of improving health and happiness in other countries is certainly something we should be doing. Coming back specifically to the BA thing, we can totally support both people as workers demanding better from their workplace and demanding that they should be able to live like comfortable, happy lives. At the same time as also saying that we do want their industry to shrink or potentially not exist anymore. But what was I going to say? Yeah, we can totally do both of those at the same time. In terms of the way that we approach it, we can speak to them, we can reach out to them, have those conversations, understand their experience, because we need to make sure that we are doing what we can and we're speaking with them about the social justice that they're demanding. But also alongside that, we can have conversations about the future of the industry they're in, which I don't think it's necessarily down to, it's not something that only we're going to cause if we gain power and get elected, but it's rather something that industry will just be on the way out. It's just how quick that industry disappears. So as part of that, we should be having conversations to encourage understanding between us and them of our position on it. And then I think the solution there is looking at putting forward proposals from their union, which include things like right to transition from your job to other careers, and looking at where those skills that you've learned and developed within that career can be applied elsewhere. That should be something that people should feel comfortable bargaining for, particularly when we recognize the significant change we're going to need to the society we live in. That's something that we should be encouraging and empowering people to demand.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. So as I can't see any hands, I'm going to move straight on to the next question, which I apologize in advance, is another big one, but worth it, I hope. So across the country, public sector pay negotiations are well underway, and local authority workers, for one group, are lodging pay claims, and they're hoping to sort of match the rate of inflation to protect their pay packets, and we support them in that. Now, meanwhile, local authorities are also seeing their budgets restricted by the UK government at Westminster, and this has been happening for well over a decade due to public sector austerity. So Green councillors are more and more part of council administrations that have to handle these difficult negotiations where the workers at councils are making pay claims to match inflation, and council administrations are facing tightening budgets. Or at least tightening funding, like cuts to funding from central government, I should say. So the question is, like, how should Green councillors address this, and how should the Green Party nationally be seeking for our party and our movement to approach this issue, this question? So it's a pretty big one, but we're going to go first to an answer to Ty Scott for an answer to this one. Ty, please do come in and give us your take on that.
Thanks. So yeah, there was a lot to take there, so I'll try and sort of break it down into different elements. But you're absolutely right. You know, there is public sector pay negotiations because public sector workers are often some of the most exploited when it comes to pay. We have sort of across England and Wales, and across all the UK, if we speak nationally. So it's something that we need to absolutely fully support. You know, it's local authority workers as well. We saw that actually just in our recent election day in May. You know, on polling day, we had local authority workers going, demonstrating outside the council on the same day. So we need to be actively supporting this calls for better pay. That exploitation moves into all sorts of different public sector work. Carers, their kindness and their desire and passion to want to provide support to those most in need is completely exploited. There's a belief, within those, especially in central government, that people will do this job anyway because they care about it, and therefore because they care about it, they'll just do it for whatever pay. We see that within the care industry, we see that within nursing, throughout the NHS, and then throughout many industries where providing care or support to people is not seen as a priority. And I think it's because they know people will do that anyway. And we as a Green Party wouldn't take people for granted. And I think that's something we also need to make clear, and we show that we stand up and we support workers and we support better pay conditions. So I think it's really, really important to do so. And one of the other things that I think you brought up there was around probably this, I took anyway, around the centralisation of many government functions. One of the things I really want us to do is increase our calls for devolved powers for regional and local government. I think there's a key philosophy that we do speak about, which is that nothing should be done centrally if it can be done equally well, if not better, locally. And I think it's really important that we adhere and promote this philosophy as much as possible. When it comes to what can Green councillors do in the National Party, I guess, the National Party, is pretty much what I've just said there. We really need to be pushing what is already our current policy. We have policy statements on this which support all these things that I'm speaking about, so really look to push them, and also work with our Green councils to help support motions within their council, where their councils make public declarations for wanting more power, over these things, because there's so many aspects, whether it's education, transport, housing, in which councils can make decisions for themselves. And what we've seen, unfortunately, when decisions are centralised, is areas get left behind. I've lived in areas of the country that have been left behind. I've not always lived in London. In fact, sadly, part of the reason I moved to London is because I thought, well, for me to advance to the next stage of my career and what I need to be doing, I have to be down in London, so there's a massive issue with that. And I think that's something that we have to be really clear about as a party. So yeah, I'm really in favour of the devolution of power to more local parties, and that genuine devolution of power of resources, that lies at the heart of our green political philosophy, then, as I've said before, is highly concentrated in Westminster, which results in completely unfair distribution of resources. So I think that we should challenge that loudly. I know our regional parties have strong statements on a lot of these things, whether that's in Yorkshire around their devolution calls. So let's support them, because we have a philosophy that power shouldn't be done centrally. We should give power, we should share power. So let's live by that.
Thank you very much for that answer, Ty. So we're going to go next to Shara. Shara Ali, how do you think we should address this issue? What should Green councillors and the Green Party nationally be doing about this?
Well, this is a hard nut to crack, but it's not intractable. Why is it hard? Well, it's especially hard because we need to carry on talking in the language that people understand. And that almost implies, doesn't it, that's the economic system that we inherit and want ourselves to reform, if not transform and completely overhaul. So one of the problems with these debates, and we have it in all pay rise disputes, is how can we advocate for and support these workers' rights and ambitions, which are modest, whilst at the same time arguing for a complete overhaul of the economic system. And I do think, sadly, this is an area where we should be doing better, despite all the good work our spokespersons are doing. I'm actually advocating for a return to carbon budgets as agreed party policy, which was something that we were pronouncing upon in the general election in 2015. And we need an imaginative idea, which is reminding people that we cannot carry on business as usual with those kinds of ways of accounting for our cost to the planet. It's not properly costed at all. And let's also remind ourselves that even when we look at train driver disputes, for example, what the elites and those who are being paid handsomely, sometimes, I think we learned earlier this year, that bosses are now being paid up to 63 times more than the lowest paid in their own workforces. That is obscene. The Greens asked for a 10-to-1 maximum pay ratio, and maybe it should be less than that again. But whilst these bosses are fighting the drivers, we're being encouraged to see those workers as the enemy, and we need to avoid that. Because guess what? It often isn't simply a reductive case of increased wages. It's about safety. It's about public service. It's actually about drivers having a bit of pride in delivering a service that they know to be safe and isn't going to put them at undue liability or risk. Now, I'll end this question just by illustrating, if you like, where I think the party needs to be advocating for a carbon currency. Because you might think, well, what does that carbon currency look like? Well, I've got an example here. This is, I hope you can see that. This is a physical exemplar of a carbon currency. It's the Bristol pound. And I've got another one, the Exeter pound. So coming back to the question around local government, we need to be organizing citizens' assemblies. We need to be allowing local people to empower themselves, because at the moment it's give with one hand and take with the other. I mean, some of you might have had, if you're lucky enough to own a house, you might have had a carbon tax rebate, but that just gets completely lost in the increased in energy bills. But what we need to be doing, just finally, is encouraging an overhaul of our economic system, the creation of more and better citizens, communities and assemblies. And I think through that, you will get the germ of innovation, where we've already seen some of in terms of the creation of carbon-based currencies and locally encouraged produce and bartering. That's actually the kind of economy we need to be moving towards, where, frankly, when we have our basic needs met locally, we become a much more resilient society and probably a more socially well-adjusted one at the same time. So that's the kind of thing I think we need to be arguing for most strongly, at the same time as pointing out that the workers' struggle is something that we need to unite around equally.
Thank you very much for that, Shara. And next I'm going to go to Nick Hummerstone, and just a sort of quick reminder of the question. When it comes to this apparent when it comes to pay claims by local authority workers and the sort of shrinking funding that local authorities are receiving from central government. What should Green councillors and what should the Green Party nationally be doing to approach this question? How do we deal with it? Nick, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's an extremely tough situation to be in, because obviously there's the extra factor of this. We just open up the line for other parties to come in and say, wow, look, they just wanted all a pay rise each. I guess my worry is that if we do give in that situation and we turn around and go, look, all right, the money's getting shorter and the cost of things are getting more expensive, but it's fine, we'll shoulder it this time, we'll not take a pay rise. The problem is if we do that, then they win in my eyes. If we do that, we let them win, we let them create this environment where they can do that at every opportunity, and they'll continue doing that. So we do really need to support people in pushing for that and looking for solutions elsewhere. And I guess the solution really in that case is we can look at councils as kind of unions as part of a structure where those councils can turn around and they can say to the people above them in the structure and say, this isn't good enough. Like, we cannot run this council with this amount of money. These are the outcomes that are happening. These many people are more at risk. These many people are dying because of the choices and the lack of funding that they're providing. That's one way we can go about it. But then the other way is, of course, to try and get our seats at that table at the top. So focusing on elections and working out what we can do there in order to break through and have more MPs there so we can start building our voice there. The thing I've always said is that if we get a second MP, we don't now have twice as much power. We have way more power as a result. It will be, I'd guess, probably 3 times as much power if we have 2 MPs rather than just 1 as we have at the moment. And if we can push beyond that and get 3, 4 or 5, then I think we'll be able to turn things around pretty quickly by showing green values loudly and clearly within Parliament and within, in order to make a difference. So it's a very tough situation. It's going to be a local focused one where different areas will make different choices. There may be ways that people are happy to concede a little bit, but we have to know that that's not an option for everyone who's involved in councils. But elections do need to be our focus in order to really turn that thing around.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. So last but not at all least, I'm going to go to Zach Polanski. Zach, how do you think we should address this question? We've heard some ideas from Nick just there about how we can make this a campaign focus. We heard a bit more from the other candidates about the sort of long-term ambitions we should have for local and regional government. But how do you think that we should be talking about how to deal with this as a party right now?
Yeah, and when you initially phrased the question, it was what should we be doing at a local level and what should we be doing at national level? And this is one of those instances where I think those 2 things are entirely congruent. Actually, the answer, whether I was talking to a fellow elected Green or whether I was talking to a fellow spokesperson, I would probably give the same advice, which is to talk and show action on the historic under-representation, under-resourcing, under-funding of the entire country. And we have Boris Johnson's plan to level up, but we know that the legacy of, I've got the name wrong, Institute of Chartered Accounts have said that actually none of this is new funding. This is all old funding. So actually, if anything, this is a disguise for pay cuts. Now, we don't even need to go into the detail as I have there to know instinctively that this government are not giving places like Yorkshire or the Northwest or Wales any more money or any more support or any more power. Tyrone was exactly right when he made his answer about devolution. This ultimately has to be not about even asking for more cash, although that would certainly help. It has to be for these places to even have extra powers to make their own cash. It's absolutely absurd that you would strangle in terms of power these local councils and local authorities and then point the finger at them and say they're mismanaging their budgets when they had no power to make more money in the budget or no money in the budget in the first place. And that absolutely needs to be called out strongly and firmly every single time. And I think we worry as Greens, particularly around climate, that sometimes we're being repetitive. We're just saying the same thing again. We're saying this is for people and planet, but actually I think on some crucial fundamental fundamental things, it's important to be repetitive. Entirely agree, we have to be interesting. If we're just repetitive and boring, we're not going to get anywhere. But we need to find new ways to say things, but it doesn't mean the things that we're saying are any different to the things we've been saying for the last 12 years, and certainly through Thatcher's time too, which is it's absolutely outrageous that this Conservative government have put councils in this position. And you don't have to be a genius to work out, frequently it's Labour councils or sometimes Lib Dem or Green councils, that they are underfunding on purpose as a political choice to then point at them at election times. And I think we need to stand in solidarity and point that out every time. With that, I think we need to be kinder to our councillors. And I don't mean not holding them to account. And I say that as an elected Green. I certainly think if we make mistakes or if we say things that are not party policy, those should be held to account. But I also think to trust in councillors and elected Greens sometimes that they're making those right decisions. And I think they also have a responsibility to spell out those decisions to the wider membership, to explain exactly where they're going. But I think we also need to recognise that they are in very difficult positions. And so I think it's about certainly not attacking them, but again, making that fundamental point that they've been put in this position by a Conservative government as a political choice to create this dichotomy. And we absolutely need to challenge that every single time. And then just to finish off my answer, I think it's also, again, I'm being repetitive here, but these things are important, about fighting for a larger minimum wage or living wage, making sure we're pushing that argument for a universal basic income, and absolutely pointing out that levelling up is an absolute disgrace. And then just finally, as an addendum, if that's a word, to my answer, just to reply to Sharara a little bit, one thing I did on the Assembly was, after I'd stood up for care workers on the picket line, I also stood up for waiters in a restaurant in Soho. It turned out that they weren't even being paid any wage. These employers decided that they were European migrants, they weren't going to pay them at all. So I went out and stood with them on the picket line and said we weren't going to move until they got the money. I then went to The Guardian, I made lots of noise, and I used political influence. This was before I was even elected. And eventually, every single one of them got their money back. But the idea that you can't be an Assembly member and also be in the leadership seems absurd when we just think about previous leaders we've had. Natalie Bennett was a prospective Parliament candidate in Holborn and St Pancras, the same time as being leader, did a great job. Caroline Lucas was an MP at the same time she was in leadership. I think she did a pretty good job. And Sian Berry, well, she was a councillor, an Assembly member, and stood for mayor, and I think she was pretty kick-ass at every single one of them. So I think it's a little bit odd argument to say we can't do two things at once.
Thank you for that, Zach. I can see we have got a hand up from Shara Ali, so I'm going to go to you very briefly, Shara, but I would like to move on pretty swiftly, so please.
Yeah, no, of course. It's not on what's just been said, or is it? It is relating to something else Zach said, which I really liked, and I think it's worth amplifying. So Zach mentioned that we should be understanding and forgiving, if you like, of the situation that Green councillors find themselves in. And this is something we really need to extend across the party, because, I see that our councillors sometimes getting berated, on social media, publicly that is, by other Greens around, not liking the policies that they've implemented and asking whether or not they are really in line with what we should be doing. I think disagreement is healthy, maybe even public disagreement is healthy, but what we have to avoid, this isn't quite the same as trust, as in trust me, I'm Tony. This is just to do with the fact that often there is more than one way to resolve a problem, and there's more than one good way. And there are many drivers that within our elected office that we will have to be having to contend with. And we really do have to appreciate that some of our solutions and some of our resolutions are going to be improved by listening to those who are on the ground making those decisions practically. So let's be forgiving, definitely, and let's not be unforgiving, because that's a kind of intolerance that I think is a big problem for the party at the moment.
Thank you for that addendum, Shara. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is a bit shorter and hopefully a bit lighter, so the candidates can take a bit of a breath. So the next question is, which trade unionist do you most admire or look up to, and why? And you are welcome to refer to present day or historical figures. Take your pick. Yeah, get thinking, and I'm going to go first to Shara. Shara, which trade unionist do you most look up to?
Hello again. Yes, Emmeline Pankhurst. And I think that we've seen some really appalling scenes recently of women converging around statues in order to campaign for what they perceive to be a threat to their rights. And How is that relevant? Well, it's incredibly relevant, because all the time we're talking about unions and how to big up our association with them and support for them. We're talking about injustice, we're talking about solidarity, but we're also talking about workers' rights to freely associate. That's a basic fundamental human right. So I put it to you that if we're going to be defending and supporting unions, i.e. their right to strike, their right to organize a picket, for example, and if we don't say a thing or don't bat an eyelid around women who are congregating around a statue and getting harassed for it, then I think we've got something badly wrong. So I think we should have a look and take a look at the kind of injustice that Emmeline Pankhurst and others in the suffragette movement in particular had to overcome, because that is a unique part of history, not that long ago that women did not enjoy the vote. So for my money, that is a particularly relevant person that we should be looking to from history.
Thank you, Shara. Over to Nick Cumberstone, and give us your admired trade unionist.
Apologies if I take one that someone else might mention, but as I'm pretty young. I'm the youngest in the deputy leadership race, so I don't have too much of a lived experience of being as part of trade unions. So the one for me is Mick Lynch, who we have all seen quite recently. There was a bit of a worry that Twitter and the rest of the internet had decided to glorify Mick as our savior that's going to turn everything around. He's not the perfect person, but something that he did really well that I really hope that as a party we can train on, develop and improve is our way to cut through clearly in the media, using words that are just as complicated as they need to be, nothing more than that, and making sure that the language we're using is to the point, states things clearly so that people can just simply understand them, and also talks about them in a way, I can't think of the best way to explain it, but the word of course comes to mind. When you use the word of course, you create this idea that, yeah, that's definitely a completely reasonable approach. Whereas we often have a worry that when we're coming to people with more radical approaches to more radical solutions to problems, we're worried that, oh, it's going to be a bit unusual. People might be a bit scared of something so different. So throwing in a word like of course helps ease people's minds. And I think Mick Lynch has done a good job of communicating the need for strike action and the need for the demands that they're putting forward in a really clear way. And I hope that as a party, we can be not just within our deputy leader, but also across the party, looking at how we can learn from that and make a difference that way.
Thank you very much, Nick. And now over to Zach. Zach, hit us with your trade unionist.
Thank you, Matthew. I really love this question. Many of you have seen I did an interview with New Statesman recently, just before I announced, or as I announced to be the deputy leadership candidate. And actually, this is one subject I got into with the interviewer there, and she was scribbling, and I said, sorry, I've been talking for a long time. And she went, no, keep going. So I apologize if this turns into a TED talk, but I'll try and keep it less than 2 minutes, but do wave at me, Matthew, if I've gone on. The reason why I'm passionate about this is because this was part of my life before I got into politics, which was acting. And so my person is someone called Augusto Boal. Now, Augusto Boal was working as an actor and a trade unionist in Brazil in the 1970s in the favelas, so in particularly deprived parts of Brazil. Now, I could talk about this for an hour, but the quick 1-minute potted version is he was working in communities with workers who felt like they were being oppressed, and he created something called Theatre of the Oppressed. And the idea was rather than the audience watching actors perform a play, the actors would perform a moment of oppression, sometime when they weren't getting their rights from their boss, or they felt there was some sort of challenge going on where they weren't able to articulate themselves. And then the audience would put their hands up and suggest what the workers could do to get themselves out of that situation or show solidarity with the other workers. And the actors then would say, no, 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 don't tell me, show me. And so this is an awful pun, but they would be spectactors. And then they would get up and get involved with the play too. Now, the reason why I love this is it was called Rehearsing the Revolution. And this was a real formative moment in South America for the trade union movement in terms of looking at a new way of politics And it started to form into something called legislative theatre. So what they would then do is create a series of demands for their bosses and say, this is how we want our workspace to operate, and then demand that change. And if it didn't change, then obviously they would take strike action. And I just love this idea that rather than listening to other people's scripts, we start to write our own scripts on our own stories. And I think actually that's totally Green Party politics too. So Augusta Boal and Theatre of the Oppressed.
Thank you very much, Zach, for that. I love the answer. I'm really glad we got to ask this question. I'm loving the answers. Right, Ty, over to you. Who's yours?
Thanks. And that's really weird going last. I was thinking, oh no, somebody says I'm going to say them. We're stuck in a bit of a corner here. But for me, it's Cesar Chavez. So those in the room may know Cesar Chavez. One of the first people to, probably the first person to unite farm workers in the United States, and did an incredible job obtaining more rights for not just farm workers in the end, for essentially multiple different causes. But Chavez founded the National Farm Workers Association, which became the United Farm Workers of America, and really worked to embody that philosophy of community organizing, something that I completely look to live by. I did a course not too long ago on leadership, organizing and action through the Harvard Kennedy School, which is the executive education arm of Harvard University. And that was sort of administered from Marshall Gans. And what we really looked at, those philosophies of real community organizing, really embedding yourself in local communities, understanding their issues, finding solutions for change, and really looking to build and share power within those communities. And those philosophies that began a lot with Chavez's community organizing in how he sort of started those unions is the same philosophies that Barack Obama used to get himself elected when he became president. Obviously, not to speak about policies that may be enacted or sort of personal viewpoints on the president themselves, but that was community organizing that got that to work. Obama didn't win his seat through dominating the media. By the time he hit the media trail, people in communities knew who he was, because there was a long campaign of grassroots community organizing that was really from the life of Cesar Chavez. And that's why Cesar Chavez Day was enacted in 2008. And Cesar Chavez left a legacy as an educator, environmentalist, civil rights leader, and his cause does live on today through so many different causes. He came out against the Vietnam War in the 60s, was a very early and outspoken supporter of gay rights in the 70s. He's somebody who stood up for civil liberties and freedom from oppression throughout his life, and sort of values I've looked to continue and embody as well. And I guess because of the way and the philosophy in which I've learned to community organize, I guess it's quite important for me in the way I've learned how these things sort of work and how I think we can build success as well in local communities. So great questions. I'm glad I've got to maybe give a bit more of a background into why I talk about the things I do and the philosophies that I live by. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ty. Love that as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, so on to the next question, which is, I'm afraid, sort of potentially less of a, well, I don't know, I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. The question is, the Conservative government is in the process of introducing a wide array of new anti-trade union legislation, and some of you have sort of referred to this in your answers already. And much of this legislation is designed to undermine unions and to prevent workers from taking effective industrial action in the near future. So the question is, what is the significance of these threats in your view, and what proposals should the Green Party be making instead to empower unions and their members? So I'm going to go first to Ty Scott for your answer on this one.
Thanks so much. A quick water break between answers then. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's something I spoke about quite strongly in the first answer, really, around these anti-trade union laws in legislations, which, like I say, is just a start or one of the many anti-civil liberty, civil disobedience laws and legislation that we see coming through. And these things in isolation are dangerous enough, disagreeable enough, and things we completely don't want to happen. But actually, together, they are incredibly dangerous. And we really can't understate how dangerous these things are. I don't want us to move into an autocratic situation. We've seen how that's been attempted. We've seen, obviously, Boris Johnson. I'm still not convinced he's going to leave in 2 or 3 months. So just taking away of our democratic society. Protest, civil disobedience is a key pillar of an active and real participatory democracy, you know, and I get concerned that I feel with our many flaws, especially with our voting system, at least I felt there was an international reputation that Britain has, you know, an open democracy. And I think that's getting chipped away at massively, you know, and that's why I have genuine anger at the Labour Party for failing their job as an opposition. You know, unfortunately, we do not have the platform that they do. I wish we did, but we don't have that many MPs. We don't have that size of a party. But they have a responsibility as an opposition to this government to ensure that our civil liberties are not taken away. And it genuinely fills me with anger that they failed in that responsibility, you know, and that is one of the reasons why I could never be a member of that kind of party, because they're not genuinely standing up for the people. And I don't understand how that is not plain to see for those that they're trying to represent. So I think we just need to be so clear that we're in the opposite direction. You know, I think I may have said in one of my previous opening statements in Hustings that they're blending into one a little bit, but you know, there is a void right now in a political party that will stand up for those values, you know, for those philosophies, and we really need to be keen that we are that. So, you know, I think I said in the Free Our Unions, you know, the pledge that we stood, you know, we want to repeal those anti-trade union laws, support workers' strikes, you know, help mobilize Green Party members to get involved with picket lines and demonstrations, inform them of their rights, make an active campaign to inform them of their rights and how they can get involved, you know, and show that we don't think taking strike action is something that is a detriment to our society, because we don't. Actually, by having strike action, it improves our society, it gives people more power, it hopefully will increase people's wages and conditions at work, and then, you know, in turn improve the economy. But I think, yeah, we just need to be really, really clear in that. Definitely look to reverse anti-union laws, but not just anti-union laws, all the laws right now that are attack on civil liberty, because I think there is an attack on civil liberty. I'm not sure it's getting spoken about enough. And yeah, that's something we need to be really clear on, especially, as I've said before, the opposition party that we unfortunately do have to rely on to be that voice sometimes aren't using their voice. So someone has to be a voice for the voiceless, you know, and that means we have to increase our platform so then we can be heard. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that, Ty. So next, I'm going to go to Nick Humberstone. Nick, so the question was, what in your view is the significance of the threats that the Tory government presents in the form of these anti-union, anti-strike laws, and what proposals should the Green Party be making instead to empower unions and their members?
Yeah, it's super difficult and really demotivating, demoralizing to see the changes that the government have put through, and like Ty said, the lack of opposition we've seen in trying to turn those things around. Seeing the anti-protest laws go through is such a huge step back, but amongst that there is a hopefulness in the strike action that we've recently seen. You know, it's not just been, oh, there's a single strike on the tubes and now everyone's like, okay, cool, that's happened. It's lots of organizations working in lots of different ways to demand better and make change. And I think that as much as our responsibility right now is to pursue politically, to keep fighting, keep pushing for MPs, in the back of my mind, it's always there that I wonder, is a revolution the only way that we get out of this problem? Maybe not quite how revolutions have gone down in the past, but maybe looking at things like general strike action is how we can change that. In terms of what we put forward instead, I guess that's to the electorate. It's difficult to say, because from our experience and perspective, these laws are just outright bad. They're not helping people. They're not making a difference to people's lives. So I guess what we need to be doing is looking at the detail of the policies being put forward and working out how we can make those connect with people by getting our messaging right and spending a lot of time to make sure that the messages we're putting forward show that not only these policies are bad, but also that we stand with the people that these policies are affecting and that we can be the ones to help deliver change. Because if we can get enough people to come together, we can make a difference. Hopefully that will be through political systems, and it will be nice and easy, and it will be through politics and voting. But there's always the possibility that other action is needed, but hopefully not.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. So next I'm going to go to Shara Ali. Shara, your answer to this one, please.
Firstly, I should say that there's an excellent pledge, which I know the other candidates have signed from Free Our Unions, which I agree with as well. And it's important because Nick actually mentioned earlier that union activity is a democratic right. It's a means of collective organization to overcome injustice. And for example, by increasing the threshold for turnout in order to legitimate or validate a ballot, that's making it much harder for workers to actually implement and vocalize their concerns. But what I'd like to do is also just remind ourselves where the government is attacking us. So the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which has been going through both houses, there were a series of amendments, for example, which were horrific. The backdoor attempt, which was defeated by Jenny Jones and others, but it's still there in the bill in other forms, a bit more concealed. But can you think of the idea and the impact, particularly upon the environmental movement and environmental activists, of criminalizing the attaching of one's own wrist, either to somebody else's wrist or to a handrail? That was in the amendment to that bill. So this assault, not just on workers' rights to mobilize and democratically decide on taking strike action, but on the right to protest itself, which could come about as a result of a democratically convened ballot, the means by which you think you are prepared to go in order to vocalize your claim and to publicize it. Because at the moment, we are in a horrific situation that your protest could be criminalized because guess what? It's deemed to be a nuisance. Well, last time I checked, there was very few successful campaign non-violent direct action, particularly from environmentalists, which weren't in some sense creating a nuisance. I was honored to have met Brian Hoare, who was a long time campaigner against the Iraq War, and he didn't move. He was immovable from Parliament Square, and his activity would be criminalized. And this is something which, as a former policing and domestic safety spokesperson, I was arguing strongly against, vocalizing the Green Party's views and fighting against that Tory attempt to criminalize our right to freedom of expression, freedom of association, and protest.
Thank you very much, Shara. And finally, over to Zach. Zach, your take on this, the significance of the threats of these laws and what the Green Party should be doing instead to empower unions.
And they're highly significant, and we should be fighting them every step of the way, whether we're talking about voter ID, whether we're talking about offshoring refugees to Rwanda, whether we're talking about the police and crime bill or the judicial review. This is a government that is not in control. Now, the good news here is this is not symbols of a government that feel like they have power, that they're steady, that when they get a new prime minister, just everything's going to be okay. This is a government who are enacting a highly authoritarian model that's come straight from Donald Trump and right-wing politics, and a way of crushing down on democratic debate and genuine access to power and people being able to express their discontent. Now, I see Virgil's on the call. I met Virgil recently at City Hall, where we had a Gypsy Roma Traveller event, and I was speaking to lots of the people from that community about the fact that in this police protesting bill, for instance, they can seize their vehicle now just for being on land. Now, of course, that's not just a vehicle, that's people's homes. So I think, again, it's really important that we talk about this in the big grand sense. And as democracy spokesperson, I do that a fair bit, talking about democracy and our constitutional rights. But also, I think it's really important that we drill down into what does this mean for individual people's lives, particularly when they come from vulnerable or marginalized communities. Now, on the policing bill, for instance, this is somewhere where we did have a big change. There were about 18 amendments that were much more draconian than the final bill that we've ended up with. Now, I don't want to be disingenuous. The bill we've ended up with is horrendous. This was just particularly horrendous. And the way we got it changed was myself, Caroline Lucas, Natalie Bennett, and Jenny Jones went out onto the lawn in Westminster. I was there as democracy spokesperson. The four of us gave speeches, particularly about the rights to protest. And the media picked up that day those speeches it pushed Labour to start to have to take a position. And before we know it, those amendments were dropped. Now, you've got to always be careful of claiming a win that's within a mile. It's got to be a credible win. But actually, the work of Jenny and Natalie there with Caroline and being out that day did start momentum in motion. So I think, again, this is another point where protesting these things isn't distracting from electing MPs. What you're essentially doing is being relevant as a party at a national level, showing that you understand these issues, that you've got interesting, radical, but also common sense things to say. One person's radicalism is another person's common sense when you're talking about coherent change from this right-wing government. And ultimately, the media pick that up. We get more airtime. We get to change the things on the ground that we need to change. And when people hear and see us speaking authentically and clearly on radio and TV, they want more Green MPs. So I think that trend is really clear there. And then finally, what can the Green Party do? Well, we've already started to do it, and that's call for a constitutional convention. Get ready with the proportional representation klaxon, but we are the only country, along with Belarus, that use first past the post. This is not democracy. And as Natalie Bennett often says, we should give democracy a try, or democracy, it would be a nice idea. Now, it's not just proportional representation. That's the one I often focus on, because that's the one that I think is rising. People are starting to understand it. And it's got a very instinctive idea that our seats don't match the votes that are given. And I think people get that. But we also absolutely need to be talking about trade union rights, our rights to organize. And it's a really important point that since 2017, that was kind of a low point for trade unions in terms of there was as little strike action. I can't remember the exact date, but it's something like 1835. So we absolutely need to recognize that's because the Conservative government, before they've even changed the rules, have already started to crack down on trade unions, both by making a hostile kind of media around trade union rights and really turning people against them, but also making it very clear that people will face harsher and harsher punishments. I was one of the first people to be arrested with Extinction Rebellion, and I would absolutely defend anyone's rights to put their head above the parapet and do something different. Now, I take civil disobedience really seriously. We can't just do that casually. It has to be really thought out. You have to have a clear purpose, and it has to be coherent. But ultimately, it is outrageous to suggest that the government can take those rights away. And I think the Green Party need to be standing up to those rights every single step of the way.
Thanks very much, Zach. And with that, we have had all of our questions answered. I'd just like to say thank you so much to all of the candidates for volunteering your time on this sweltering Monday evening. It's been great to have you all here, and thank you so much to all of you for joining this meeting. Before you go, because I'm not going to let you get away that easily, I have a few things that I wanted to share with you. The first is that next Monday, the Green Party Trade Union Group is hosting a panel discussion called Trade Union Strategies in 2022. And we've got some great speakers coming to that, including the chair of the UCU's anti-casualisation campaign, a great rank and file trade unionist who I know well. We've also got Emiliano Molino, who is a journalist covering labour disputes and other trade union issues. We've got Robert Maisie coming from the RMT, coming from the TUC, who used to work at the RMT, among others. So it's going to be a great event. That's 7 p.m. next Monday. Please do join us for that if you can. I will put a link in the chat. The next thing to say is that a recording of this Hustings will be on YouTube and on Facebook. Please do take a look at that if you want to look at anything again, but do also share with other Green Party members. We want as many people as possible to be informed and to cast an informed vote on August the 1st when voting opens. Make sure you follow the Green Party Trade Union Group on Twitter, on Facebook, and also join our mailing list and become a member. It's free, it's great, it comes highly recommended. Please do it. I'm going to put all the links that you'll need in the Zoom chat now. And finally, there is also a very quick ask from us. You'll see in the Zoom message I'm about to send you all, there is a link that you can click. It's labeled click to tweet. If you click on that, then your Twitter will magically open, and there will be a pre-composed tweet for you to send saying how great this event was and how great our event next Monday is going to be. Please do click on that link. I'm going to keep the call open just so you can do that. So I'm sending it now. Please do click on that link. Tell everyone about our event next Monday. It's great. Please do. So I've sent that now. Anyway, that's all from me. Thank you again to Shara Ali, Zach Polanski, Nick Humberstone and Tyrone Scott for coming to speak to us. And I hope all of you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.